Hey guys. Okay, so now that you know what supplies you need, let's talk about some of the exercises that we're going to do to help us with our substantive edits. Okay, so I'm going to say you're going to need your handy dandy little index cards. Okay, whether those are physical or digital. And here are some of the things or this is one of the exercises that you're going to do in order to help you strengthen those scenes. In fact, I think it's the first exercise that you should do in order to do that. Okay. And that is to start writing your scenes down by memory. Now, you can do this a couple of different ways. Like some folks like to take a piece of paper and just write as many scenes as they can think of from, start to finish. However that would work for you, and write it on a piece of paper and then go and make index cards. Okay, that's cool. You can totally do that. Some people like to go straight to the index card and just write all the scenes out and put them in order, of course, because that order kind of helps. But in any case, whatever you do, either route is totally cool. It's up to you. I do suggest index cards over sticky notes because there's a lot of info that you need to include here. Okay. All right, so what you're going to do, overview of this memory exercise. And if you've watched a preview or, if you watch the mini conference video on substantive editing, you're going to see that you're going to try to make a list from memory. Okay, so ideally, you should have given your novel a rest and you've given distance to it. You don't know anything. You don't remember as much as you do or as you normally would having just worked on it. Okay. But you've given yourself that distance. And now on June 1st, you're going to come in and you're going to start doing these scenes from memory. Okay. Now the purpose of this, let me tell you this up front, is that you're wanting to first find out which scenes are definitely not pulling their weight. And in this case, they're not memorable. Okay. So, because those scenes are the ones that need the most attention first. Okay, now, so you're going to make your scene list from memory and you're going to fill these out. And I have a little handy dandy little thing I'm going to pull up on the screen for a second. Okay, and you're going to see what you need to put on the index cards. Okay, now these are the ones that you remember, A to Z, everything 1 through 50, whatever it is that you remember. Okay, so I usually start out with a sentence in the middle of mine where it just talks about what happens in the scene. And then I maybe give it a title, if you will. That way it's an easy reference and you know what this one's about. Up in the top right corner, if you have multiple POVs, this is where you can put that. That way you can make sure that you remember who's in charge of this particular scene and who's the one that we're seeing here. Now, also in that sentence, I forgot to mention, I always put the characters who are involved in the scene, and then I kind of highlight them so that I can make sure I know who's in there, because we're going to reference all these cards later, and any information that you don't remember is important to note, because if you don't remember it as the author, your reader won't remember it either, okay? Next, and the last and final thing, anything that I can remember about that scene as far as as far as payoffs go or reveals that happen. Okay. So, in this particular one, and of course, this is me coming to it after I've done my substantive edit. Any scene that you have needs to pull weight. In other words, it needs to be doing multiple things. It can't just be doing one thing. Okay. So in this instance, as you can see on the screen, I've got about 3 different payoffs or reveals, if you will, what makes the scene important to the overall book. Okay, so this is Rose gets creeped out by a guy right before this scene happens, and we find, my main character Hurry finds out about this, and and notices that, and that is a foreshadowing. Okay, so, and then this scene is also a touching scene where we get to see these 4 friends together and get to see how they interact together. So it is a touching scene. And then also there's tension as well, because the 3 friends don't know about the lies in Huri's life. And that's a problem, as we will see later on. So this scene is pulling weight in three different ways. Okay. And so from memory, you need to try to remember what those are. Okay. And then later on, we're going to beef these up. Okay. If it's only pulling weight in one way, then we need to make sure we address that. Okay. All right, so that's what your index cards are. And that's how you're gonna fill them out. Again, this is done from memory. Now, as I mentioned before, you're gonna need a scene list. You don't get that scene list until you have finished your index cards, okay? That's when once you've finished and you've gotten every index card written out that you can remember, you're gonna go and print out your TOC or your scene list, and you are going to do a comparison. Good fun, right? Okay. And I promise this will be very illuminating because you're going to find that there are scenes that you are missing. So once you see those scenes that you are missing out of your deck, okay, now this is a good time if you have, what I would do is I would highlight the ones that I was missing, and then I would go back with a different color card so I could address those and get those scenes written out, okay, to figure out what's wrong with them. Why did I, as the author, forget this scene? I shouldn't forget any of them, right? They should all be memorable, because these are the ones that you're going to want to tackle in your editing plan first, okay? You're going to need to make some decisions about, are you going to cut it? Are you going to combine them? Is it actually important? And it was just so not memorable that you've got to add to it or fix it in some way. That's highly possible. Maybe you had a story beat there you didn't realize, and it's just not memorable for whatever reason. You need to beef it up. Okay. So that's the why you're doing this little exercise. Okay. So that's the first exercise that you need to do. Okay. And you're going to, once you have this exercise done, you're going to take that scene list and start making notes on that scene list. That way you're not like trying to juggle all these cards. You're going to make notes on that scene list about exactly what you need to have happen. Okay. So let me take a second and I'm going to show you what one of my substantive edit scene lists kind of looks like. That way you get an idea of what I'm talking about. Now, this is when I was still making sticky notes because I was still having to move some stuff around. But at least you'll kind of get a sense of what we're talking about here. Okay. So I had can you tell that I used sticky notes and then wish that I didn't and did more of the index cards? Trust me, index cards give you more room. Okay, now here is an example of one of my scene lists. And as you can see, I've just got bullet points about what I need to do I need to do in order to fix this particular scene. Look, here's one that says, totally cut this one. I don't need this one. This is when I'm cutting out an entire POV. And then I just have all these other little tidbits that I needed to do in order to fix each individual scene. And so that's your next exercise. Once you have all your scenes kind of mapped out on index cards, you're going to see which ones are weak and which ones need to, like I said, be beefed up. And you're going to make a decision. Am I going to combine these? Am I going to, get all of, combine them or cut them, however it works out in your particular novel. Okay. Now, here's the rub. Okay. So once you have your scene list ready and you've got your plan of attack, your editing plan, this is going to be your editing plan. Once you have your plan of attack ready, you've got to execute that plan. Okay. You've got to implement those changes, and that takes some time. Okay. And this is kind of part one, if you will, of a substantive edit, okay? Because you want to make sure those scenes are in place before you start trying to work on the second part, Okay. And this is, and you can try to do this at the same time. It's kind of, I like to break it up because my brain can't take too many tasks all at once. So, um, what I would do is I would execute or implement that plan that I made, and then I would come back and go back through and start reading and making sure that, like, the beginnings of my scenes really work well together, and then the ends of my scenes also lead the reader to want to continue to read on. Okay. So that's kind of the nitty gritty of things. Okay. So you have two kind of paths that you need to go with. The first one, again, is creating that plan and implementing that plan. Okay. Or, however you want to put that. Okay. The second path is going to be to make sure that you go back through and you smooth out the transitions, because those transitions, believe me, you want to make sure that you keep your reader turning that page, and that's the deal with making sure you smooth those transitions out. Okay. All right. So that is kind of an overview of what you're looking for there. Okay. And how you're going to kind of execute that out. All right. Now let's talk about goals. All right. Okay. So just like I gave the folks over in Storyweaver some ideas of what to really look out for, and things as you're reading through, because you are going to do another reading pass with this, especially if your goal is to help to smooth out some of those transitions. Okay. So, but this will also help you as you're going through for that pass, to kind of focus in and making sure that you are, you're hitting these really big points and making sure your scenes are pulling weight. It's these ideas or things to focus on are going to help you to make sure that that the payoffs are happening. If you need to, it gives you ideas of ways to combine different scenes if that needs to happen, or what needs to be cut or even added. It's just going to give you a lot of ideas for that particular for the substantive edits. And they do in many ways, because developmental edits and substantive edits are both big revision edits. They do mirror one another, but for substantive edits, you're really going to focus in at the scene level to make sure, like I said, that they're pulling weight. Okay. And they're doing as much for you as you can. That way you don't have fluffy scenes and editors later on and agents later on don't come to you and say, that needs to get cut and we need to redo some of your structure. Okay. All right. So here we go. Are you ready? All right. So first up, we're going to focus on character, of course, and we're checking our character's arc. Now, we do this when we're doing a developmental edit, but that's across the whole novel. Okay. With a substantive edit, we're looking at each scene. Okay. So the questions that you're going to want to ask yourself are stuff like, does this scene cause my character to grow or even regress in some way? Okay. That's number one. What is my character gaining out of this? And what's the payoff for it? Okay. Has my character gained knowledge, or are the readers getting extra knowledge from that the main character doesn't have? Okay. So make sure that's another way. If maybe you have two scenes and one of them, your character is kind of learning more about themselves or something like that, but that's all that happens. And maybe in another scene, you have the readers finding out a nice chunk of information that your main character doesn't have. Can you somehow combine those two together so that one new scene is pulling the weight of both of those items? And which is really cool when your readers are like, oh my gosh, I just found this out and my main character doesn't even know it. But then they're still doing this really cool new growth part. Yes, it needs to be nice and tight and pulling more than one duty, so to speak. All right. Other questions you need to ask about the scenes are, how does this scene serve my character? And what obstacles are in my character's way? Because yes, you need to make sure that the scenes are having some type of tension and that it is, like I said, serving your character by pushing them on toward their goal of the final countdown, the final battle, so to speak. Okay. All right. So those are the four main things that you need to be really looking for and checking with each scene as it applies to your character's arc. Okay. Now, the next one, let me pull all these up. I'm looking at my slides as I go. All right. So the next one is going to be about structure. Okay. Now, the main question that you're going to be wanting to make sure of is, does this scene support your overall plot, or is it just kind of like a filler, or um is it like you're running off on a tangent somewhere? And you don't want to do that. You don't want to do either of those things. You want to make sure that every scene is pushing your character toward the development that they're supposed to attain by the end of the novel. Okay, that's what the plot is really all about. Okay, so you're going to be asking yourself stuff like, is this scene memorable? Is it pulling its weight? Is there a conflict in it of some kind? And are those things all working toward putting the character into the new person they're supposed to be at the end of the book? Okay, all right. So those are your structural questions that you need to be asking as you're reading back through and looking at your scenes as a whole. Okay. Okay. So the last thing that I'm going to tell you to focus on again is pacing. Okay. Now these are again reflected like in developmental editing and also in substantive, but the focus, we're narrowing it down a lot more. Okay. So we're looking for with pacing, where is the lag? Okay, that's the big question with pacing. Where is the lag? Or, where is it exhausting? But usually it's lag for a lot of folks. Okay, so I want you to pay attention to this is especially true when you're going back from memory and you're realizing, oh man, I forgot all about these scenes. Well, if you forgot about them, again, a lot of times it's a pacing issue because yeah, it's just perhaps there's a lack of conflict there. Perhaps it's one of those filler chapters that when you were writing it, you thought this was super important, but now you get to it and you're like, oh man, this is not important at all. This just takes us off on some wild tangent that we don't really need. That sort of thing. Even, and I'm going to drill down a little bit more, is within a scene, are some of your paragraphs info dumpy? Pay attention again to where you are getting bored and you're skipping paragraphs as a reader, or you're the writer, but even as you're reading through it, are you skipping paragraphs? Are you yeah, that's a big indicator, and that's one of those places that you need to slow down and take a second and notice, if am I info dumping here? Is there just too much text? Is there too much description for no reason? Can I condense some of this to help with the pacing? Okay. Also, you need to pay attention to those places where things are happening way too fast. Are you racing through things, or have you realized you get to a point in a scene where you can't envision anything anymore, and perhaps there's too much dialogue and there's not enough setting. Perhaps you're missing why this scene matters because you haven't gotten enough character development out of this scene. Okay, maybe we need to know some of the characters' thoughts about what's happening. There could be a whole plethora of ideas. I'll say again about like having too much, like if you look at the text and there's blocks of paragraphs, it may not be necessarily info dumping, but maybe you've got a couple characters in the room and they need to be having a conversation and they're not. Could be the opposite, where you have way too much dialogue. I mean, that's usually my problem. But either way, you need to pay attention to just even how the text looks on the page or on the screen. That way it can really help you a lot with just noticing some of the pacing issues that can come along. Okay. All right, let's keep going. Okay, so now we are going to talk about a few do's and don'ts of substantive editing. Okay, so what I let's start with the don'ts because they're really short and sweet. Okay, so you still don't want to look at grammar. Okay, I know that I said that you can do this on the computer, and I'm well aware of the whole, how would you put this? The temptation, I guess you could say, to look at, all the stuff that Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid is telling you. Don't, okay? Turn those suckers off, okay? That's not the purpose of this edit, okay? Because you're going to end up changing all that junk anyhow, okay? You're going to fix your stuff later on. That is for the wordsmiths, okay? That's when you get there. So don't do that. Turn it off. Leave it alone. Just focus on your scenes, okay? And making sure they're all doing what they're supposed to be doing, okay? All right. So now, these are the do's of substantive editing. All right. So you do absolutely only want to focus on your scene level stuff. Okay. You should have your structure in place. And you can fix some of that structure a little bit here, but primarily that's a job. If you have major structural issues, you shouldn't be in this guild. You should be over in the story weavers. Okay. But for scene crafters, you're only looking at your scenes. Okay. That's why it's called that way. Okay. All right. So next thing that you want to do is you do want to make your scene from memory. Like I said, I could not believe how helpful that step alone was in helping me see what was not working and what was working. And it really helped me. Like I said, I can't recommend that enough. So definitely do that first. And then as you start to develop your plan, and you got your editing plan in place, you're going to be able to do the next thing, which is to smooth out those transitions from your developmental edit. Okay. Now, your developmental edit is probably about like a machete going in and chopping stuff up and moving stuff around. It's, oh man, it wasn't too pretty. Okay. And right now, this is the first time you get to smooth some of that out. So as you're implementing your plan and you're going in and making those changes, you can round out and smooth out those surfaces so that the transitions are effective between your scenes and your chapters. Okay. So definitely do that as well. All right. And I'm also going to tell you that if you're struggling with this, all right, come see us in Discord. Okay. All right, this is why we're here, okay? We're here to help you guys out and to make sure that you are not feeling alone in this process, okay? Because this is tough, okay? This is one reason why I think that this substantive edits are broken out from developmental because it's tough. This is a making sure, and it feels a little bit tedious at times. I understand. To me, it felt that way at least. But your overall book is really going to benefit from this. So please do come see us, and we'll celebrate with your highs, and commiserate with you with your lows, and hopefully encourage you keep going and don't stop, because you're going to be great at this, and this is going to really help you grow not only as an author, but it's going to make your book so much better in the end. Okay. So just keep going. You got this. Okay. All right. So this video is going to kind of be all about what to do after you have completed your substantive edits. And this is kind of like a little bit of a fun part. Okay. Or at least I think so. Maybe some folks consider it nerve-wracking, but I don't know. But that's all about letting other folks read your work. Okay. This is a great point in time, as I mentioned before, where you get some beta readers or you think about hiring a developmental editor and that sort of thing. Okay. And that's because you have done all you can at this point to, under your supervision, so to speak, be able to get your novel as good structurally as you can. And this is when you want other readers to take a look at it so that they can make sure that that they're letting you know and you're getting feedback about any of the structural issues that you need to tackle before you move on to the copy editing, line editing phase, which is where the wordsmiths are. Okay. So there are a couple of different routes that you can go, of course. There are some folks who do, there's a couple different types of readers, I should say. So, of course, I mentioned beta readers and then also actually hiring a developmental editor who will take and they will take your novel and be able to give you a very in-depth critique that looks not only at the big pictures items that the story weavers are looking at, but also at the scene level items that we are looking at as scene crafters. Okay. So you can do those too. Also, it's just like a little throw out there. I know several writers who actually use alpha readers who as they're kind of writing their first draft, which doesn't serve you right now necessarily, but you could do that as you're drafting to kind of help kind of correct things as you're drafting. But for the most part, we're going to be looking at beta readers and developmental editors. Okay, so beta readers are just usually other writers, and you exchange your novels or portions of your novel for critique, and then in return you give them critique. Okay. It's a really great it's a really great exchange, and you learn a ton as a writer from critiquing other folks' work and getting to read other folks' work and that sort of thing. And you get to see a lot that you do that you need to improve upon based on what other folks do, which is wonderful. And also, it just and then you get the wonderful advantage of having very objective feedback given to you. And so I mean, it is a great all around thing to have. And usually it's free. Now, there are some beta readers who offer that as a service. So you would pay them a certain amount of money. The ones that I've seen cost around $200 or so. It just depends. But they would beta read your work and give you feedback like a beta reader would. But in return, you're giving them funds instead of you having to read work in return. So there's advantages to that too, where if you're kind of on a tight schedule and you don't have time to read somebody else's stuff, and you just need the feedback, then hiring a beta reader may not be that bad of an idea. Okay. But make sure that they're reputable. Yeah, that's my main thing. Just if you're going to do that, make sure that you are getting a reputable beta reader. Do your research, that sort of thing. Okay. Because this is kind of a new thing, charging for beta reads. Like I said before, there's also those developmental editors. Now, out of all the editors, these are typically the most expensive because they are diving into a lot, but they're particularly helpful, especially if you're into speculative fiction, so fantasy, sci-fi, all that kind of jazz. They help you make sure your world building is working properly, that all the stuff that we're looking at between the two guilds, the first two guilds, that is all going to be covered under a developmental editor. And again, super helpful, but also pretty costly, which is why a lot of folks go with beta readers rather than paying for a developmental editor. But if you can swing one, they will definitely help you improve your writing, no doubt at all. And it is definitely an investment in your future as a writer, as an author. Okay. So, where do you find these folks? Oh, well, first, let me say, okay. So, the reason why I tell you at this point, kind of the win of doing beta reads and developmental edits. The reason why I suggest to do it at this point is, as I said before, this is a great spot to make sure that you are good structurally. Okay. This editing journey is all about effectiveness and making sure that you are not wasting your time and doing things kind of out of order, because when you do that, like I said, it wastes time. It bogs you down. You will feel editing is hard in the first place. Okay. So you don't want to make it doubly hard by polishing and doing all that to something that still has a lot of issues. And so you want to catch those big issues now so that you can fix them and then start your process of doing line editing and copy editing and that sort of thing. Because if you go ahead and you polish it as good as you can get it, and then you send it off to beta readers or your developmental editor, they're going to change, they're going to encourage you to change a lot of things that you may not have expected that you thought were okay. And you've just wasted all of that time doing the line and the copy editing. Okay, so do you kind of see where I'm going with this? It's best to do this before you kind of move into that stage. Now, I will say, a lot of people say, hey, are you supposed to do, should I polish this thing before I send it to betas? Yeah, don't send them a raw script, okay? Like when I say polish, I mean, make sure your spellings are correct. Do some light, grammar stuff. That way, they're not focused on that, and they're more focused on the story. But you, as the author and as the one getting the critique, of course, you're supposed to, give them some questions you're looking for to make sure that things are being followed. That what you want to have come across is coming across. And in that little packet, or so to speak, or those few paragraphs that you give your beta readers, you need to let them know, okay, hey, look, this is where I'm at. I've done a very light, very just, spell check pretty much just to make sure everything's spelled correctly. But just know that the prose is not going to be as polished as you might expect. And because I want to make sure I'm catching these structural issues, and let them know that. And say, so if you see stuff, unless it's like egregious, don't worry about, the prose, and don't worry about, grammar stuff, because I will fix that later. But I want to tackle this. Just let them know that. And every critique partner or beta reader that I've had has totally understood where I was coming from, and they did exactly that, and they focused on that instead. So just make sure you're upfront with them and let them know that that the state of your manuscript pretty much and what you're looking for, and they'll be super okay with that. That shouldn't be a problem. Okay. Now, how do you find these folks? Okay, so let me tackle developmental editors, because they're a little bit easier to find. Okay, so my number one recommendation is Reedsy, and that is REEDSY.com, I believe. So like the read as in the, not reading, but read as in the plant. But in any case, so Reedsy, REEDSY.com. And I will have a link, of course, on the website, so that you guys can find that. They have a lot of reputable editors on there. It is like the premier site where to find editors. It's where I found my editor. So these folks are vetted, and they have great credentials. They have reviews on there. I mean, it's just it runs the gambit. You can try and find some on like Fiverr or what's the other place, Upwork or something like that. But just know that, hit or miss on the quality. You might find some really great developmental editors, but it's just, kind of buyer beware kind of stuff. Do your research, make sure that they're legit, because if they're on Reedsy, then they are. Reedsy vets them. And they even have a system where you can pay for the services through Reedsy, so that both parties are protected and that sort of thing. So definitely check out Reedsy first, and then kind of go from there. I will say, if they're on Reedsy, then you probably are going to pay a little bit more for them, but you get what you pay for, okay, when it comes to editors. So just make sure that you are doing due diligence and doing research. Okay. So for beta readers, how do you find those folks? Okay. Well, first off, I will say, look around in your guild. Look around Discord, and and talk to folks, because the best way to do it is to kind of meet organically. Make sure you guys jive, and that your styles and your story, like the genres jive, that sort of thing. I will say one thing, if you, it's really great to get beta readers from your demographic, from your ideal reader perspective. So if you can get beta readers who are, for me, like, want to make sure that my beta readers are, at least a parent, a mom, somebody that understands this kind of stuff, but at the very minimum, reads fantasy and the type of fantasy that I write so that they understand the genre and what's expected. Just make sure, like I said, that they work, that the relationship that you have is going to work for you. Okay. There are times, maybe if you're writing like an entry level book into a certain genre, that you might want somebody who's not in genre to get that perspective. But in general, it's usually best to make sure you have somebody who knows at the very least about your genre and ideally who fits your demographic. Okay, because that's your ideal reader. If you get, somebody who's used, if you write sci-fi and it's like a space opera, and you get somebody who's a hard a hard sci-fi writer, then they're not going to give you as good of a feedback as somebody who's used to reading space opera. Like it's just not going to be the same thing. So do be selective, okay? When you look around and try to find folks. But our group is a great place to start out. There are also in town, there's a writing association, the Tallahassee Writers Association, and I am part of them. So if you have questions about that, shoot them my way and I can help direct you. But once you join up with them, and their dues are pretty affordable. It was, I think, around $40 or $60. I can't remember how much it was, but it wasn't too bad at all. And there's a lot of great benefits to joining up with them. And one of them is that they actively look for people who are wanting to get into a critique group. So, yeah, and it's genre specific. So that's great. So you can hit up the writing associations, and not just that, but if in your genre, there are writing associations, and they're always doing, critique partner meetups and stuff like that to help you pair up. So not just locally, but, in your genre, I would encourage you to look for those folks as well. Also, if you are in school or if you are going to university somewhere, your fellow classmates that are maybe in your creative writing class, or perhaps you've just kind of know each other from whatever, walk of life you're going through at school. They can be your critique partners too. Maybe they're not a writer, maybe they're just a reader and they're totally into reading other people's work. However that works out, you can look at the school as well. Okay. Another big one, and this is the last one that I'll mention, is Scribophile. And this is a really cool service. And yeah, it's super cool. It is you can find their website, and I'll put a link, of course, so that you guys can find it pretty easily. But Scribophile is pretty much all about critiquing. It's a website that's all about critiquing. So you have a bunch of different authors there. There are readers on there who want to read new stuff from brand new authors. And, and I know established authors who still use Scribophile. But in any case, what you do is you create a login, of course, and then in order to post your work to be reviewed, and I think it's like a cap of about 2,000 words or so. So double check me on that one. But before you can post your work to be reviewed, you have to go in and review a bunch of other people's stuff. And cool thing about this one is that even though you're reading other people's work, it's not like you're downloading their files, which keeps you safe as well as an author, because your work is then not being downloaded. You have to kind of use their platform in order to make comments, and it's super easy to do that. And then you receive credits for you automatically receive credits for your critique, and there is a minimum of a critique that you have to give before you're able to receive a credit. And then if the author thinks that you did a phenomenal job on the critique, they can give you extra credits to kind of like reward you for doing a spectacular critique. So yeah, super helpful all around. That website is. There is a free version, and then there is a paid version, which I think gives you some extra credits, or I can't remember what the benefits are because it's been a while since I've used them. But it is a really great site to make sure that you're getting your critiques in and that you're critiquing, and it's very much a give and take relationship. So, you're not in a group where one person critiques and the other person doesn't return the favor, which is not a fun thing. And it's just not a fun thing. But in any case, so those are your main ones to look for. Okay. the folks around here, and then make sure you look at writing associations, whether that's locally or globally. Also, make sure you're looking at your schools or universities because they will typically have folks who are looking for critique groups. And lastly, look for Scribophile. Okay, and that is a really good place to start. In fact, I would encourage you to start there. Really, if you're not able to find somebody locally. And plus, if you do start a critique group, amongst your guildmates, or your guild members, you'll be able to, you can create a scene crafters group over there on Scribophile. That way you're all critiquing each other's stuff and you're giving and taking and keeping track of stuff, and nobody's having to download files. And yeah, it's just, trust me, check it out. Okay. All right. Well, that's about it. That's all that I have for this one.